Hi, this is a PowerPoint video about our government deficits and debts. And the key question here is our national debt good? Is it bad? Maybe it's a little bit of both. And should we balance our federal budget? Balancing a budget means that if you only take in, for example, $8, then you can only spend $8. That would be a balanced budget where your income equals your spending. What do you think of this? First, let's get informed. First, we want to remember why we have governments in the first place and why governments need money. Economic Principle 10 says governments can do some things better than the markets can. For example, provide a defense, police, courts, roads, and public schools for everybody, protect the environment, regulate products, and provide welfare. How can governments get money? Well, one way is through taxes, but politically, a lot of Americans don't like taxes. And also, remember that taxes generate some deadweight loss. A government could also print money, but what's wrong with printing money? And the last way that a government can get money is a government can borrow. And the government would sell, or sometimes it's called floating or issuing bonds. You sell bonds in exchange for money, and that's how governments borrow. But taxes are unpopular. Printing money leads to inflation. Borrowing is another way to get money. It's called debt financing. First, we need to understand some basic terminology. In 1 year, if you earn more than you spend, you end up with more money maybe than you need. We call that a surplus. In 1 year, if you earn less money than you spend, you end up with less money than you need, and that's a deficit. So when you have more than enough money, it's a surplus. When you're short, it's a deficit. If you add up annual deficits over time, you get the debt. And you need to pay back the money you owe plus interest, or else you default. Defaulting means that I just can't pay back this money. And then the next time you go to borrow, the cost of your future borrowing will be very high or very low. In other words, if the US government defaulted and did not pay back some earlier debt, then the next time they try to borrow some money, they'll have to pay a high interest rate or a low interest rate. Again, when we evaluate these statistics, like is our debt too high, is our debt too low, we need to look at absolute numbers. In other words, how many dollars were actually spent, and relative numbers. How does that compare to others? We need to look at percents. We need to look at changes over time, spending and debt per capita, in other words, per person. And we need to look at international comparisons. How much debt are other governments in? So here is the US federal government spending going back about 120 years, going back to 1900. And the red shows you the years where we have run a deficit. In other words, we spent more than we brought in. The green shows you the years where we had a surplus. In other words, we spent less than we brought in. So has the US federal government been running more deficits or running more surpluses? Here's a more recent picture. Here again, you see the deficits. That's when the government each year spends more than it brings in tax revenue. Here are the surpluses when the government ends up with extra. This was right after 1991. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. So President Bill Clinton spent a little less on the military, and as a Democrat, he raised taxes on the rich. We had a brief surplus there. But for the most part, the federal government has been running deficits or surpluses. Add up all those deficits, and what happens to the debt? Here we're going back almost 100 years to 1930s and the Great Depression, and you see what has happened here to the debt. This is in millions of dollars. Okay? Has the debt gone up under red Republican presidents or blue Democratic presidents? You see the presidents at the top. Or has it gone up under both? That previous chart was dollars. This is dollars. Let's also look at percents, okay? As a percent of GDP. In other words, as a percent of our national income. All right. And here you see it again. The red are the Republican presidents, the blue are the Democratic presidents. What has happened basically over the last 50 years? Even as our country's gotten richer and our GDP has gone up, what has happened to our debt? I like this graph because it shows you the red Republican presidents and the blue Democratic presidents. And if you go down to the bottom, it also shows you who controls Congress. Okay. And Congress, remember, is the Senate and the House. So again, looking here over the last 50 years or so, from 1970 until 2020, and looking here at congressional control, has the debt gone up under red Republican presidents and Congresses or under blue Democratic presidents and Congresses, or has the debt gone up under both? What about under Trump? You see that the debt, the annual deficits, he's run annual deficits, okay? And Trump and the Republicans cut taxes at the end of 2017 in December, and spending went up. And so taxes went down, spending went up. So we ran these annual deficits. And this is before COVID hit in 2020. Here's another look. This is percent change in national debt by presidential term. Okay, so Trump added to the debt and Obama added to the debt. 50% in his first term, I think that is, 18% in his second term, okay, and red Republican Bush and blue Democrat. So you see the debt going up under both blue Democrats and under red Republicans. This is another way to look at it. You see that Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 to 1989, red Republican. He added to the debt. Okay, he cut taxes and spent more on the military. George H.W. Bush was a Republican. He added to the debt. Bill Clinton was a Democrat. He added to the debt. And George W. Bush was Republican. He added to the debt. 9/11 happened early in his presidency, and we spent more on the military going into Iraq and Afghanistan, and he cut taxes on the rich. So more military spending, lower taxes, added to the debt. Barack Obama also added to the debt. So in 2007, 2008, at the end of Bush and at the beginning of Obama, the subprime mortgage crisis hit. The banks loaned money to a lot of people who did not pay back and who couldn't pay back. Maybe the banks loaned too much money, and George W. Bush and Obama bailed out the banks. In other words, they gave the banks about $11 trillion so the banks could get back on their feet and give deserving Americans car loans and home loans and college loans and business loans and that kind of thing. So there's no question Obama added to the debt a lot. And again, under Trump, spending went up, and he cut taxes. And then the COVID hits, and Trump and the Democrat Joe Biden also spent a lot, and so Biden has also added to the debt. Where does that leave us? That leaves us here looking at the federal budget here in 2018, and you see that we spend about 8%, let's call it 10%. We spend about 10% of the federal government budget paying back the debt. In the future, our taxes are going to be more or less flat, and our spending is projected to go up here in the 2030s. We're spending more on Medicare for the old, Medicaid for low income people, Social Security, that's retirement money for the old. And you see here, we're projected to spend more, and our tax income is going to be more or less flat. So we're going to be spending more in interest. What do you think of that? Are you okay with this? Um, what about other countries? Is the US in a lot of debt compared to other countries? Well, here you see more or less 30 rich countries that make up the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And here you see the United States in the red line here with the diamond. So, compared basically to the 30 other countries, and compared to our income here, this is GDP, national income, are we in a lot of debt? About average? Little bit of debt? So, here you see Japan in pink. Japan's in a lot of debt. So 180%. So for every dollar they have in income, they owe almost $2, almost 200. They owe a lot. Okay. How does the US compare to these other rich nations? And are you okay with that? Here's another look at our debt burden, our debt load per capita. In other words, per person. So we're looking here at rich nations. This includes India and Russia over here on the far right. And you see here again on the far left, Japan is in a lot of debt. So if you looked at it in terms of US dollars, this is per capita, per person. Japan's in about $90,000 worth of government debt per person. And this is PPP, which means purchasing power parity. It's been adjusted. You know that stuff in Japan costs differently compared to the US. So, how does the US rank here among these 30 countries? A lot of debt per person, a little debt per person. And are you okay with that? As of spring 2015, who does the US government owe money to? And you see here that about 2/3 of the money is owed to Americans. That's US individuals or other parts of the government. And I tried to set off in red here the amount that we owe to foreigners. Okay, so China here holds quite a bit of our debt. Japan owes quite a bit of our debt, and Belgium and Brazil and the United Kingdom. You could argue that American government owing money to Americans is okay. For example, if the government owes money to grandma in Kansas, the government pays her back plus a little interest. So the grandma in Kansas, she makes some money off this. So for 2/3 of the debt, that's the case. For this 1/3 of the debt, when we pay those people back, that money's leaving the country. Is that bad? Or is it good because they want to see the US government succeed and they depend on us? This is 2015. This is 2018. It's a more recent look. And again, the US government owes about 1/3 of the money to US investors. That's grandma in Kansas. She lent $100 to the US government, assuming she'll get $100 back plus interest. The government also owes about 1/3 of the money to itself, and 1/3 of the money is owed to foreigners. Which foreigners? China in particular, Japan, Brazil, they hold a lot of US government debt. In other words, they've loaned us a lot of money. We owe them that money back plus interest. Is that bad because the money's leaving the country? Or is it good because these countries depend on us? They want to see us do well. Here's another look at it. Okay, China and Japan have loaned us a lot of money, and so we got to pay them back. Here also you see Brazil and Belgium, and you can pause this and take a look at it. Here's some political cartoons. They're kind of fun. Here we see the elephant, representing the Republican Party. Lots of times they say they want to spend less. And here is the donkey representing the Democratic Party. Lots of times Democrats say we want to spend more to help this group or help that group. And you see here, this bomb represents what? And here you see the people. Are the people saying cut the spending or cut the arguing, cut it out, maybe cut the fuse? What is the meaning of this political cartoon? Here's another one. All right, this is kind of Uncle Sam here representing the government. The government's run up some serious bills here, okay? And that's being passed along to these future generations here. So, what is the point of this political cartoon? Here it is. This is kind of Christmas Day. And here's a youngster, maybe a young American or future American, and what has been left for them. They've opened this up, and why is this youngster crying? What's the point of this political cartoon? Here you see another one. This is the donkey representing the Democrats and the elephant representing the Republicans. And lots of times they decide to spend and cut taxes and delay the tough choices, such as raising taxes or cutting spending. They kick the can down the road. What does that phrase mean? What does that do to future generations like these kids? What is the meaning of this cartoon? And by the way, today the national debt as of 2022 is about $30 trillion. Last cartoon. Here is the federal government saying to Americans, you have to control your spending. You can't spend too much. And yet, the federal government's done a lot of spending and they've got a lot of debt hanging over their head. And what are the Americans saying to the federal government? So, who really needs to control their spending? And what is the point of this political cartoon? So, again, are you okay with this debt? Do you think it's too high? Or do you think we can afford it? Should the U.S. reduce its debt? And how? Should we raise taxes, lower taxes, raise spending, cut spending? What do you think the U.S. government should do? What should we do? Should the U.S. government balance its budget? Where, for example, the government brings in $8 in a year, it can only spend $8 in a year. What would be the costs and benefits of that approach? I hope this has been clear. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.